Anthony Joshua takes on Daniel Dubois this Saturday, the 14th of September, at the Wembley Stadium. Now, the Wembley Stadium has an incredible capacity of 96,000 people. So can you imagine the roar of the crowd in that arena? Now, this is probably a long-awaited all-British affair in which Joshua and Dubois vie for the IBF World Heavyweight title. Let's take a look at each fighter's strengths and weaknesses and then see how they match up. Anthony Joshua is 28-3 with 25 KOs. His 3 losses come by the way of Andy Ruiz, who stopped him, and Alexander Usyk, who got the decision against him twice. Dubois is 21-2 with his losses coming also by the way of Usyk, who stopped him, and Joe Joyce, who also stopped him. Let's take a look at Anthony Joshua first. So, one key advantage that Joshua has in this fight is the fact that he has a considerable height advantage. Now, both fighters come in at approximately 250 pounds. I have no idea how many stone that is, sorry guys. With Joshua being typically slightly just above 250 and Dubois just slightly below 250. So there's not a huge mass advantage for Joshua. However, that height advantage and reach advantage do play into his best weapons, which is a second advantage that Joshua has. I feel that Anthony's best weapons are his jab and straight right hand. Now, I'm going to put a bit of a disclaimer on that because I'll double back to this. But provided that Anthony's able to keep the fight in kind of a linear sort of path, kind of like a fencing track, then his jab right hand are terrific weapons and very effective, particularly when he blends his jabs right into his right hand so that they're basically one motion. Now, the third key advantage I think that Anthony Joshua has in this fight is the experience on the big stage factor, because he's fought at Wembley before, of course, taking on the legendary Vladimir Klitschko. He's also taken on Francis Ngannou in his last fight. Now, you can say, well, of course, Francis is not a bona fide boxer, which he isn't. But the point is that Francis Ngannou is nevertheless a big superstar. And so Joshua took on somebody of huge status, with a huge following on the Riyadh season card in Saudi Arabia. So in other words, he's used to being on the big stage in front of a lot of eyeballs and under that type of pressure. Anthony Joshua has also been subjected to the pressure that rematches bring. Of course, with his rematch versus Andy Ruiz after suffering that devastating KO loss to Ruiz, he was able to come back and eke out the decision. And of course, in spite of the fact that he lost both times to Usyk, he did rematch Usyk. So overall, we can say that Anthony Joshua has faced the bigger name opponents on bigger stage than Daniel Dubois. Now let's take a look at 3 areas of concern regarding Joshua. Well, the first is I'm concerned that he's a little bit, as we would say, chinny. And this factor was exposed, of course, by Andy Ruiz. So it seems as if once we find a little weakness, or Andy was able to find a little bit of a weakness there with Joshua, drop him once, and it was just sort of the beginning of the end. So I wonder if Anthony Joshua suffers a little bit from that Amir Khan factor, where a fighter who relies on their speed is just not used to perhaps getting touched, and so when they are touched, it takes a much bigger impact than it would on another fighter, simply because they just haven't been conditioned to getting touched up much, whether it's in sparring or in an actual fight. Now, the second area of concern for me with Anthony Joshua is the fact that he keeps his torso and his head fairly upright. There's not a lot of bending or breaking at the waist to sort of twist or bob and weave. And sometimes he almost keeps his, I wouldn't say he keeps his chin jutted forward, but he doesn't kind of look out of his eyebrows and then angle his head off the center line sometimes. And I think this adds to his susceptibility. But the third and biggest issue I have with Anthony Joshua is his footwork. And you guys know my one huge pet peeve with footwork is fighters crossing their feet. And Anthony does this going in both directions. So he's an orthodox fighter, so his left foot is in front, his right foot is in the rear. If he's moving to his left, he'll cross his right foot behind his left foot. And if he's moving to his right, he'll cross his left foot over across his right foot. Both huge no-nos, because when you cross your feet as a fighter, whether it's a boxer, grappler, judoka, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, you're off balance. You're completely off balance when you cross your legs. But it gets worse, because the second thing Anthony Joshua does not do is he does not coordinate his foot movement with his punches. So take a look, even going back to his amateur days, what Anthony Joshua does is he kind of bounces around on his feet to move in and out of position or to move laterally. And then when he goes to throw his jab, he simply keeps his feet planted and throws his jab. Now he's got a strong upper torso, and so he can whip that jab out there quickly. But as my very first boxing trainer, Connie Bryant, would say, the captain always goes out with the ship, which means you take a step with your lead foot and you throw your jab simultaneously. The jab should land and your lead foot should land simultaneously. And I feel that Anthony Joshua is one of those fighters who is just so successful, probably, with his jab right hand without coordinating his footwork with his punches, that his trainers just allowed him to get away with it, because I guess their philosophy was, why argue with success? But it's the sort of same trap that Deontay Wilder fell into with his straight right hand. Flawed fundamentals eventually do catch up with you. So, for example, take a look at Anthony Joshua's footwork in his fight with Usyk. Because Usyk was so fluid with his motion and creating angles, sometimes Anthony would have his lead foot twisted at an angle while his body's twisted in the opposite direction, simply because he couldn't adjust his feet to kind of line up with his torso in proper fashion. And when a fighter's in that type of position, they're completely stuck in place and completely susceptible because they're not able to move. So here's the sort of disclaimer to when I said that I felt that Joshua's best weapon was his jab straight right hand. Well, it is, and it could be better if he would actually take the step on the jab and then turn his torso and push off his right foot, or at least twist off his right foot as he's throwing the straight right hand. Now, at this point, it doesn't matter who Anthony Joshua's trainer is. If you were going to try to reteach that footwork, it would take a lot of tedious drilling, and it's hard to say whether somebody of Anthony Joshua's status would be, and ego perhaps, would be willing to put up with just taking, step punch drills over and over for rounds on end. When they're a world-class heavyweight, right? Why should they be subjected to these boring beginner drills? But honestly, that would be the only way to undo these flaws and reteach proper hand-foot coordination. Now let's take a look at Daniel Dubois. So I feel that Dubois has a couple of terrific weapons. One is his jab overhand right, which of course being the shorter heavyweight, he makes very good use of that. You can see that in play versus in his last few fights versus Jarrell Miller and Filip Hrgovic. I expect to see him using that overhand right versus Anthony Joshua, again because Joshua has the height advantage. Now that jab overhand right, if Dubois adds his left body shot behind that, that makes it even better. Another weapon that Dubois uses quite effectively and used quite effectively versus Jarrell Miller was his right uppercut, left hook, in close quarters. Dubois was able to use that to kind of wear down Jarrell, and then finally just finish him off with just a barrage of hooks to the body and head. And particularly against somebody like Joshua, whose chin might be a little bit suspect, that right uppercut is a terrific weapon. Because when you knock the head straight back, that's really a discombobulating punch. Follow through with that left hook that they never see coming, and that's money. Another asset I feel Dubois has is that he has very good defensive head movement. He's able to weave under punches, as he did with Hrgović. He makes these like very tight weaving motions, so he doesn't overshoot his weave and put himself out of position. He's still right in line to fire right back immediately. Dubois is also good at just sort of bobbing and weaving in general. He kind of has to be as the shorter fighter. And finally, as surprising as it may be for the shorter heavyweight, Dubois does have a very good jab. And unlike Anthony Joshua, he steps in with his jab. It's super effective when Daniel uses a double jab and steps in on each jab, because that just helps close the distance for him. Now, having said that, I'm going to say one area of concern is that sometimes as Daniel's coming in, he doesn't always take his head off the center line, and that's when he gets caught. So granted, it is very draining for the shorter fighter to be in that constant motion, like a Joe Frazier type thing, where you're constantly moving your upper body and bobbing and weaving, moving your head. After a certain point, you do kind of get tired and kind of want to just stand still for a moment, but that's when you're going to take a big shot. So particularly with Joshua really having a great 1-2 jab right hand, Daniel's going to have to be very careful of not just sort of freezing his head on that center line. Second area of concern for Daniel Dubois from me is the consideration of damage taken. So if you remember back to the Joe Joyce fight, I mean, his eye looked horrible. I'll assume the orbital bone was broken, but I think that or was it the eye socket bone? But it was like, typically when someone breaks their orbital bone, the eye doesn't always swell up as badly as Daniel's eye swelled up. So that was pretty horrendous to see. So hopefully it's 100% healed, but I'm just concerned about sort of the damage toll that took. Also, he was stopped by Usyk with some hard headshots. Usyk dropped him, I think, at least twice in their fight. So again, sometimes when a fighter's been dropped or touched that hard, it's easier in a sense to bring them to that point once again. But we won't know until we see Daniel in there. Finally, in comparison to Anthony Joshua, the concern is, for Daniel Dubois, he's now going to step out on a huge stage. I mean, it's almost 100,000 people in Wembley Stadium. Joshua's been there before, but Dubois has not. So will the moment get to him, or will he be able to keep a cool head as he makes that ring walk? I'm not sure how long that ring walk takes, but I imagine it takes more than just walking out at the theater at Madison Square Garden or something. Now, what do Anthony Joshua and Daniel Dubois need to do in order to win this fight? Well, for Joshua, he needs to keep Dubois at a distance, keep him on that straight line path, and just line up his 1-2. As flawed as Anthony Joshua's footwork may be, if he can just keep Dubois on that path, then it doesn't matter that he doesn't take the step in, particularly if he can catch Dubois coming in straight at him. and just firing off a counter jab right hand. Now, when Joshua is not preoccupied trying to fire off his 1-2, as Dubois presses forward, we'll assume, Joshua does need to sort of make those lateral movements, cross legs nevertheless, cross feet nevertheless, I should say, but he doesn't need to make good use of lateral motions just to stay away from Dubois or to create more distance between himself and Dubois. On the other hand, Dubois should, of course, keep pressing forward. He's got to keep the pressure up. He's got to bob and weave to try to get inside and create angles as much as he can. Now, Dubois is not an Usyk in terms of creating angles, but he doesn't need to be, because I feel Dubois is more comfortable on the inside than Joshua is. Now, I did notice that in his fight versus Jarrell Miller that Dubois would push Miller away from him, and I'm gonna assume that's because Jarrell could tend to kind of clinch up or drape himself over Dubois, and Jarrell had like 100-pound weight advantage, so I guess Dubois just wanted to keep Miller off of him, quite literally. But I don't think he needs to do that with Joshua. If he's able to close the distance on Joshua, he should not push him away. He should just stand his ground and work, keep firing those right uppercuts, left hooks to the head and to the body, and then fire off, rapid body shots as well. So in a sense, it's a little bit of a question of who can maintain their territory, and I kind of give the advantage to Daniel Dubois simply because he does have the better footwork than Anthony Joshua. If you notice, Dubois always got live feet, meaning he's on the balls of his feet, he's kind of bouncing. This gives him the mobility to change direction suddenly, and to come in and out and change the distance suddenly. I also feel that Dubois has the better momentum leading into this fight, in that, yes, he took that loss to Usyk, but then he came back and pulled off a terrific victory versus Jarrell Miller, again, who's somebody who was on how many PEDs? 6, caught twice at least, and had and was over 330 pounds. I mean, 100-pound weight advantage. That's crazy. And he was able to stop Jarrell Miller. And then in his subsequent fight, he was also able to stop Filip Hrgović, who I think, people probably thought Hrgović was going to win that fight. So I feel like Dubois got a huge sort of moral momentum in his favor. Now, yes, Anthony Joshua is coming off of 3 victories versus Wallin, Helenius, and Ngannou. But, I mean, quite honestly, those victories pale in comparison to Dubois' victories, simply because of the sort of disparity in ability, shall we say. I mean, in other words, Joshua was pretty much expected to win those fights, and he did. So I'm guessing, I really haven't checked out a lot of YouTube videos on this, but I'm guessing that people are favoring AJ to win. I'm gonna go with Dubois, and here's another factor: is that I assume that Daniel Dubois will have his father either in his corner or close by, because his dad seems to be a huge motivating factor. In fact, it looked like when Dubois was having a little bit of trouble versus Jarrell Miller, Frank Warren went and fetched Daniel Dubois' rather vocal father to come offer some words of encouragement, shall we say. And I do think that did help turn the tide of that fight to get Daniel motivated. So provided Dubois can keep his wits about him in Wembley Stadium and stick to the game plan, and provided he's also coming into the fight in the absolute best of condition, because it's going to take every ounce of conditioning to maintain the pace that he needs to maintain versus Joshua, I think that Dubois is capable of pulling off a victory. Now, if Joshua and Ben Davison have worked out an impeccable game plan that absolutely minimizes the fact that Joshua has very flawed footwork, then if they can figure out a way to just set up Dubois to step into Joshua's jab right hand, then I think Joshua is also capable of pulling off a KO. But I always like to root for the underdog, so I admit I will be rooting for Daniel Dubois in this matchup. Who are you rooting for? Who do you think is going to win? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please do subscribe and hit the notification button. Please share this video with your friends. And as always, please comment with your thoughts about this upcoming fight. I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you for listening.